My name is Andrew Zimdahl, one of the co-founders of Honeydew. I'm here with my co-host and co-founder, Julian B. Hope you guys are having a very nice morning. Just a little housekeeping. Everybody's entering on mute, but if you have any questions through the presentation, we want this to be a seminar. We want this to be a conversation. So don't be afraid to jump right in and ask questions when they appear in your minds. So let's get this presentation on the road here. So this is a brief overview of what we're going to be doing today. We're going to start by talking about benchmarking. That's the reporting of the data needed. Then we're going to do a brief overview of the building energy performance standards. Then we're going to talk about how the different pathways that you can take to comply to those standards. Everybody's favorite topic, what the penalties for not complying with the standards will be. How you can get delays approved and what delays can be approved. And then finally, we're going to wrap up by talking about what you can actually do to improve your Energy Star score and comply. So most of you are familiar with the process of benchmarking. This is entering energy data and space data into the portfolio manager. That's going to be done. 1 second, guys. Okay. After you enter the data into Portfolio Star Manager, that's going to give you an Energy Star score, and that score is going to be based on your energy usage intensity, or EUI. And the EUI is going to be a term that we're going to be using a lot during this presentation, so make sure you're familiar with that. After all that data is in the Energy Star score platform, it's going to rank you based upon the peer data on that property type. So for example, if you are a movie theater and you enter in all your data and you get an Energy Star score of 50, that means that nationwide for all the movie theaters of your type, you are ranked somewhere in the middle. If you have an Energy Star score of 100, it's going to be the most efficient, and an Energy score of 1, it's going to be on the least efficient side. If you're curious about what your property or anybody else's property scores are, you can access them at the link below, energybenchmarkingdc.org. Next up is the deadlines for when you have to report. The first tranche was 50,000 square feet. That happened in 2014. The next tranche is going to be next year for 25,000 square feet and above. And then the final tranche that's legislated is 10,000 square feet and above. That's going to happen in 2025. And then there's a separate part in which the data that you report is going to have to be verified by a third-party engineering firm. The first 2 tranches are 2024, and the final is going to come in 2027. And then from there on, it's going to have to be verified every 3 years. And then we're going to pass the mic over to Julian, who's going to give an overview of the building energy performance standards.
Great, thank you, AZ. And right before I get to this, I just wanted to clarify on a few things. When AZ mentioned the EUI, the energy usage intensity, that is calculated by your total energy and gas usage in the building divided by the square footage of your building. So that's one way to calculate it. And then the Energy Star score is your score based on, or your efficiency based on the property type compared to all the other property types in the country. So we're gonna go over Beps right now. What it stands for is the Building Energy Performance Standards. This was enacted in the Clean Energy DC Omnibus Act of 2018, the same act that is requiring DC to switch to 100% renewables by 2032. Now, with the Beps program, it's essentially requiring buildings that fall below DC's median Energy Star score for that property type. We'll go through those median scores in a few slides from now. Or if your building is not able to get an Energy Star score, like for shopping centers, then you would have to base your EUI and compare that to DC's median EUI score. If you do fall below the DC median Energy Star score or above the DC median EUI, then you will be put on a 5-year compliance cycle where you need to reduce your energy usage in order to comply. Now we're going to go over the DC median Energy Star scores and EUI scores. Here we've put a sample of some property types that have the DC median Energy Star score and EUI scores. This is coming from a much larger list. We really try to focus on the buildings that we believe the people in this webinar are managing or own. The first one, which the majority of you guys are managing or own, is the multi-unit residential or multi-family buildings. The Energy Star score, median score, is a 66. So if your building falls below this, then you need to make sure that you're starting to prepare for this program, since already started this year for buildings above 50,000 square feet. The median EUI score for multifamily buildings is 111. What really caught our eye here was comparing this to the other building types. So non-refrigerated warehouses, as you can see, this Energy Star score is very low compared to the multifamily buildings, which means that the warehouses in DC just happen to be less efficient than the other warehouses in the country. But the EUI score happens to be very close to what the multifamily building median EUI scores in DC. And the same thing goes with retail stores. A lower Energy Star score, around the same as the multifamily buildings. But if you look at the EUI score, it's very high. And then strip malls is an example of a property type that cannot receive an Energy Star score. So you have to base that off of the EUI score. I do see we have a few questions in the chat. Can you discuss the difference between site and source EUI? So I'm actually going to get to that. And mostly properties are calculating site EUI from the utility data they have on hand. Calculating site EUI. Okay, great. So I'm going to discuss that in a little bit. So just get to there. And then if you have additional questions, Adam, then please take yourself off mute and you can ask them there. So we'll go on to the next slide now. So now for the schedule. As everybody here knows, since you're joining this webinar, buildings above 50,000 square feet are required to start the Beps program in January 1st, 2021. For buildings below that, but above 25,000 square feet, you're going to be required to start the Beps program in 2027 if you qualify. And then buildings above 10,000 square feet is not until 2033. Tyler, you raised your hand. Do you want to take yourself off mute for a question?
Yes, it actually, thank you. It actually goes back to a previous slide. Apologies for the delay, but when it's between 25,000 and 50,000 square feet, the deadline for entering in data is April 2022. Is that correct?
That is correct. So next year.
Oh, I thought it was April of this year. Is that not?
So technically you're correct, right? So it's using 2021 data, but reporting it next year because we don't have all of 2021 data right now, right? So each year that it's required to be submitted, you're using the previous year's energy data. Does that make sense?
Right. So we're not required for the buildings between 25,000 and 50,000 square feet, we're not required to enter in the 2020 data by April of 2021. Is that, we're not required to do that?
That is correct. That is correct. Yes. It's not until next year that you'll be required to do that for 2021 data. Right now, it's only buildings above 50,000 square feet to report last year's data. If they haven't reported data before that, they have to report data all the way back to 2014 when it first started. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Of course, yeah. So now the next
Julie,
slide after.
Can I ask you a question
schedule.
quickly?
Yeah, of course.
For the building square footage, I have one, I guess what we call community that has 6 buildings. Each building, I think, is under 25,000 square feet, except for one. So is it by building or by total in the community? So like in that example of my 6 buildings, I know one is going to be above 25,000 square feet. I think the rest are like 23,000 square feet. So am I just going to report the one building, even though it's part of a larger community that encompasses 6 buildings?
Great question. So in terms of benchmarking, it all depends on the meters in the building, right? Or the campus, I would say. So if these buildings share a meter, whether it's water, gas, or electric, then they're considered one large campus, and you would have to calculate the total square footage of all the buildings in that campus. So for some buildings at EJF, for example, there's Fairfax Village. Each building has their own meters. There's no shared meter for that entire property, right? So they wouldn't be considered above 50,000 square feet. But if each individual building, let's say, is around 15,000 square feet, then they won't be required for the 25,000 square feet benchmarking. But once it comes down to the 10,000 square feet, that's when they will be required. So it all depends on the meter share, pretty much. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this particular example, all those buildings have individual water, gas, and electric meters. So I'm just going to be reporting.
Then you're good until next year.
Well, on the one building, I'm going to have to report.
Exactly. That's
Okay.
true.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Okay, great. So I'm going to continue on. If there are no more questions, I'm going to check the chat. Okay, great. So in terms of the Beps compliance pathways, there are 4 different pathways that you can choose from. We really recommend 3. The 4th one isn't as clear right now. And again, things could change since this webinar, because DOE is still finalizing all the rules and regulations after the public comment period, which ends today. We'll be sending any questions we can't answer to them right after this webinar so that they can send us the answers and we'll share it back with everybody. But let's get started with the pathways. So the first pathway, pretty simple. It's called the performance pathway, right? And this is if you fall below the Energy Star score and are in the 5-year compliance cycle. You have to reduce your adjusted site EUI by 20%. Now, what is the adjusted site EUI? That's essentially your EUI average between 2 years. And there's going to be a baseline adjusted site EUI and a target adjusted site EUI. The baseline is going to be getting your EUI score from 2018 and 2019 benchmarking data. And that is what is going to determine if you fall below or above the median EUI score. And then your target adjusted site EUI is where you want to get, right? That is going to be your EUI score in 2024 and 2025, the average of that. So you need to reduce your EUI score from 20% from the baseline adjusted site EUI by the end of the 5-year compliance cycle. This is best for buildings that have a very low Energy Star score, or for buildings that can't receive an Energy Star score if you have a very high EUI score, right? The higher the EUI score, the less efficient you are. If you cannot receive an Energy Star score for your building, which I don't think applies to anybody here, but if it does, please reach out to us after the presentation. We can talk one-on-one. Then that is when you'll actually have to reduce your site EUI by greater than 20%. There are all these little details in this program. But don't worry, we understand the majority of it for now, so we'll be able to help throughout the process. The next pathway is the standard target pathway. For this one, if you choose this pathway, you just have to meet and go above the DC median Energy Star score, right? So for multifamily buildings, that's a 66. If you're above the national median, which is 50, and your Energy Star score is not far from the DC median score, so let's say you're a 60, for example, then standard target pathway is the best pathway to choose, because it will be, depending on the building, of course, a little easier to reach the DC median Energy Star score. Moving on to the next one. This one's a little bit more complicated. It's similar to the performance pathway in which you have to reduce your EUI score. But the first step is you have to provide an audit report to DOEE. Together with the DOEE, you're going to choose the top energy conservation measures, ECMs, as you see written here, that will reduce your EUI score by 40% if your Energy Star score is above the national median, or 30% if your Energy Star score is below that, right? So first you show them the audit, then they're going to choose the ECMs that you should really target. After that, they're going to reduce that list so that your goal is to reduce your EUI by 25%. 25% is really the number that we should be looking here. And with that said, you're not required to actually reduce your EUI by 25%. You're required to implement the energy conservation measures that you agreed upon with DOEE. Each of these ECMs are going to be valued in points. You're going to need to meet a total number of points. If for some reason your EUI score didn't decrease by 25%, you're fine as long as you completed all of those ECMs. So with that said, this is better for people who need more certainty that they are going to comply as long as they follow the rules. But at the same time, it involves a lot more reporting and a lot more submitting of data. So for example, this is like the schedule on how you need to do this for the prescriptive pathway. A year after compliance cycle, you have to submit the audit report and entities that you're going to work with, right, to meet the 25%. Or actually, no, to meet the 40 or 30%. Sorry, that's the first one. 2 years after the compliance cycle begins, you're going to have to come up with an action plan to reduce your EUI by 25%. 4 years after the compliance cycle begins, you're going to have to submit an implementation report with permits and inspection reports. So basically showing, all right, I've scheduled everything out to be installed. These are the projects. This is when I'm going to do it. And then that 5th year, you're going to have a monitoring and verification report to prove that these things are running and that it's saving you money. So even if you don't hit that 25% reduction in your EUI, you'll be fine as long as you tackle all those ECMs. Now for the 4th one, which is still being developed, so we kind of understand it, but from what we understand, these tend to address unique situations for limited population of buildings, or for buildings that want to go above and beyond the performance pathway. So other buildings that may qualify for this, from what we've been hearing, are buildings that are converting their property type. So for offices, for example, that are not doing so well right now, that plan on converting to multifamily or hotels, that would be a good pathway for them. As we learn more, we're going to be updating everybody about this, but we think that very few buildings are going to actively be on this alternative compliance pathway. But if we do, as we learn more, if we do think your building's a good fit for it because of the complications, then we'll work with you on that as well. Now, something that's very important is for the 50,000 square feet and above buildings, you need to choose a pathway and submit it to the Beps portal through DOEE before February 1st next year. So you have until then, and I wouldn't wait. I would choose something closer to the fall. And between now and the fall, probably start talking about it for each of your buildings if you manage multiple or own multiple. And we can work with you to understand which of the best pathways are perfect for it. You can also change your pathway later on in the process. I believe there's a deadline. We aren't sure when it is, but you are able to change your pathway if you think that it's not going to be feasible. Someone's raising their hand. Adam?
Yeah, on the prescriptive pathway, have they given any consideration to what the value of these different methods is? For example, like we do smart thermostats or energy management systems. How would those play into that?
We don't have answers to that yet. That is a great question. I'm going to add that right now to the list of questions. There you are.
Yeah, and
Thank
it
you.
So,
might be situational too. Every building is in a different circumstance. So one ECM might have a much greater impact on a particular property than another. So it might be weighted differently for an individual building's plan.
but that's something we'll get an answer for because that is a great question. And I believe, I'm hoping that they provide it beforehand, but they could discuss it with you and base the points off of your specific building and what ECMs would be a best fit for it. Will reduce the most energy. Maybe you get more points for something that reduces a lot more energy versus something that doesn't. So that's something that we'll provide to the group after.
Hey, Julian.
Yeah.
I did arrive a few minutes late, so I'm so sorry if you said this before, but for some
course.
of us who are relatively new to this,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of acronyms here. So I know ES is Energy Star, EUI, Energy Usage Indicator?
Intensity. Yep.
Okay.
So EUI is calculated by the total energy usage. So it's really converting the kilowatt hours for electricity, therms for gas into KBTU, right? So it's KBTU per square foot of your building.
All right. And then ECM is energy conservation methods or means or something like that?
Measures. Yeah, you almost got it. That's great.
Yeah.
So ECMs are basically the projects that you can implement in the building. So solar, HVAC replacement, boiler replacements, window, all that type of stuff, which we're going to go to later on.
Well, let me just make sure I understand what you said in English, because basically it sounds like it's just short of nuclear science. And so I really appreciate having you here. Essentially what you're saying is that if you have a building that's been reporting in the last 3 or 4 years, because you're over 50,000 square feet, you're giving us a 1-year heads up that we have to choose some path in order to get to the goal, whether or not we think it's reasonable or not, but whatever the goal is, DC has decided that we should be at, we have 1 year to tell them how we're going to get to that goal. And then how long do we have to get to that goal?
5 years. So technically 4 years after you've chosen it.
Okay.
And you don't have to say exactly how you're going to get there. You just want to say which pathway you're going to take, right? After that is when you can do your energy audit, or you could do it before, and then start submitting what projects you plan on doing, so on and so forth. There are going to be more details on how to submit this all through your personal Beps portal account. So everybody's going to have a Beps portal account, kind of like the Energy Star Portfolio Manager account, and you got to continuously update it on there. There are going to be more details
website to go to. I'm so excited.
Exactly. We're excited about that too. But yeah, again, we're here to help ease the pain, understand this all for you so that you don't have to do all this research, and pretty much hold your hands along the way so that we make sure everybody's compliant. Great. So I'll get to the next point, which everybody's been waiting for, are the penalties. These are significantly higher than the benchmarking penalties, which are $100 per day, which I thought was significant. Then they slammed us with this. Just to start, these are the maximum penalties. These are, if you do start complying and you haven't fully complied, there will be a fractional fine or fractional penalty based on how far you've gotten, right? So we'll start out with the biggest buildings in DC, about 50,000 square feet, $7.5 million maximum penalty. That is no joke.
500,000.
That's 500,000 square feet.
What did I say?
Above 50,000.
My bad. Sorry about that. Above 500,000 square feet. And then you can read this. I don't need to explain this to you, but really we're focusing on everything that's above 50,000 square feet. So the lowest maximum penalty someone can have if they're below the 100,000 threshold, 100,000 square foot threshold, would be $1 million maximum penalty. Now we'll go to the next slide and I'll show you how to calculate that fractional penalty for each pathway. So for
Julian,
example,
I'm sorry, can I just interrupt you back on the penalties?
Please.
This is the penalty that you would incur 6 years from now if you fail to reach your goal.
Pretty much, yes.
Right. And then you're going to now show, and then it's going to be fractional. If you get to 90% of your goal, you might just have 10% of the penalty, which would still be substantial, but
Now, DC's goals are not to penalize buildings. They're dangling this as like a red flag, using more of a stick than a carrot approach. They will work with you, right? So they'll give you a few chances before they'll send a letter
I get
to
it.
notice about this, just like with benchmarking.
You get
Like
time to-
benchmarking, they won't fine you on April 2nd.
Right.
They'll work with you. If you're not communicating with them and they go through their entire process, I think it's like a 3-step process. By that third time, that third letter, you owe that penalty. So again, DOE is great in terms of wanting to work with us and not penalizing these buildings. But they are dangling this to show you, you have to do this, or else you could get penalized. So again, how to calculate this, how to calculate your penalty if you did improve the efficiency of your building, but you didn't reach your goal for your pathway. For the performance pathway, if let's say, for example, that you reduce your EUI by 10% instead of the required 20%, 10% is half of 20%, so you'd only get a 50% penalty. These are all kind of simple math. Standard target, it's all based on that gap between your score and the score that you're trying to reach, the DC median score. If you narrow that gap by 25%, then your penalty is going to be 75% of the maximum penalty. For the prescriptive pathway, as I mentioned with the points, we still don't know how they're going to measure the points and everything based on the ECMs. But if you implemented 12 points, let's say out of 18, right, kind of making this up because they haven't provided too many details, then you would be penalized 33% of your penalty. And then for alternative compliance, nothing really is out there that we found for the fractional penalties. So that's going to be provided hopefully shortly, I would say in the next month or so. And then we'll provide that info. And after today is the last day for the public comment period. That's when we're going to submit these questions that we can't answer, along with other questions that we've come up with. And it's probably, knowing DOE, going to take them 1 to 2 months to actually go through all of that, because I'm sure they've gotten loads of them from AOBA and BOMA and all these organizations in DC. And they're going to probably go back and forth. So it'll probably be a few months until they have the final regulations and details. On to the next slide. Thank you. So now for the delays. Your delay, you have 1-year delays up to 3 times, right? But in order to get approved, here are some examples that DOE will accept. Financial distress, change of ownership, not change of management. So if it's switched to a different property management firm, no delay. Major renovation, change in property type, the building is vacated, or you can get approved for an exemption with pending demolition. And back to when I said, I talked about the change in management, that's why from here on out, for all the managers in here, really important that you inform the boards about this, and that you at least have maybe one board member who is aware of this program, aware of the pathway you've chosen, aware of the audit reports, so that if they do change the property management firm and you end up receiving that or sending them to a different property management firm, at least the communication will still be there, and they'll still work with the same company. Very important, because a lot of the time the communication is lost. They don't know where to go. If no one on the board knows what's going on, that could be a heavy penalty they'll face, and the new property management company is going to have to deal with that, which would suck. So very important to note. Next slide. Great, and I'll pass this over to AZ.
And before we move on to this next section, I can't see it, Julian, but were there any other questions that anybody has?
Actually,
Overview?
yes. So shameless plug for the Building Innovation Hub. The hub is launched in October to help building owners, designers, engineers, contractors understand Beps, learn what they can do to comply, and connect with resources. Yes, so we have definitely heard about this hub. It could be a great resource. We're going to be connecting with them as well. so that if you don't have time to be doing all that research, we'll be there as well. But yes, thank you for sharing that, Teresa. This is definitely great information.
Sure. Just wanted to make everybody aware that we were there, and I'm sure we'll work together soon.
Perfect. Thank you, Teresa.
Julian, the first slide that I saw, which may have not have been the first slide, but you gave the scores, and 66 was the median score or the average score?
The DC median score that you need to make sure your buildings are above. And if they're not, then that's when they have to go into the 5-year compliance cycle. So that is the threshold.
That's the score we have to
66
get.
for multifamily buildings, yes.
And I guess my question was a little bit mathematical, but is that the median score of all buildings in that category in DC?
All multifamily buildings, correct.
Oh, all right.
So-
Yeah, there's different.
I was just going to say, you don't necessarily have to get that score. It's just if you're below that score, you'll be subject to Beps. So if your score is 67, you really don't have to worry about this program until the next compliance cycle in 6 years. But you should get prepared, because over time, your score, if you don't do anything, your score is going to fall relative to your peer buildings. Does that make sense? Okay.
And what's the ultimate goal here? Is the ultimate goal to get down to zero energy? I mean, is that where they're pushing us to? Is there like a 25-year plan here where they want us to be all producing energy at our buildings?
Well, one thing I'm going to throw in is this is not the only cycle you're going to go through. This is the first cycle.
Yeah.
There will be multiple cycles. I don't know about zero, but they're just trying to make, and this DC is gung-ho about being the most aggressive in terms of energy efficiency. That's what's helped create a lot of jobs in that field here in DC, which is great. But again, that puts the burden on building owners and managers. But yeah, they're going to continue this. We are not sure what the end goal is, but it's just to make DC one of the most efficient places in the country. And also to add to that, you will benefit from this as well, from reduced energy expenses. So
I get it.
Even it's kind of forcing people to do that, but then all of a sudden your budgets are going to be a lot more open to invest in other projects for refurbishing the building and everything with all the savings.
And I'm assuming I can get a nice fancy list from you that tells you all my current buildings and what my current score is.
Yeah. I mean, we're doing your benchmarking at EJF. So once we're finished with that, then we're going to provide you with a list on which buildings fall below. The problem with benchmarking is it's very hard to be as accurate as possible, especially when you're not the person who owns the building and know every little tiny detail about it. So that's what we're going to be doing after we submit the reports. We're working with DOEE to make sure that all those scores are accurate, because some buildings come back at scores of 99 or a 1, which doesn't make any sense. So for those that are doing their own benchmarking or with other companies, please make sure that that stuff is as accurate as possible, so you're not creating a false Energy Star score that will end up being or end up pushing you below the score or above the score when you really don't belong there.
Mm-hmm. And it looks like Mr. Healy has raised his hand.
Mm-hmm.
Take yourself off mute, Mike.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Great. Thanks for putting this together, guys. This is super informative, very interesting. Do you know, has DC considered a credit trading mechanism similar to what's in New York, where lower scored buildings can buy credits from higher scored buildings to satisfy their obligations?
I have never heard about that. That's something we can definitely ask, though.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, certainly nothing in the legislation.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Okay, any other questions on the Beps overview before we get into audits?
Yeah, can you hear me? This is Jack. Hey, this is Jack. Hey, so I just want to make sure that I understand the 66. That's where it currently stands, that 66 mark, and that's most likely where it's going to be for the next year, right? That's where it is today, but that's what the benchmark is going to be. Is that right?
Yes.
So yeah,
Okay.
that's set in stone for 50,000 square foot. It'll be reevaluated before the next tranche, the 25,000 square foot comes in.
Okay, and so effectively, the 66, that says that if the national average would obviously be 50, that means that DC's average is slightly above the national average.
Yep.
And so the compliance plan, because we're in DC and it's that category is slightly more efficient than the rest of the country, then the compliance plan is essentially we need to stay slightly ahead of the rest of the country.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And what sucks for the very old buildings in DC is that the median score in DC is including all the brand new LEED Platinum, LEED Silver buildings.
Mhm.
So they're the ones that are carrying the score and pushing it way up high compared to these older buildings that are less efficient naturally because they weren't built like these LEED certified buildings. But it doesn't mean that you can't get to that score or reduce your EUI by 20%. That is something that that definitely can be done, but it could require investments, or it could you could implement no cost what AZ is about to present, no cost improvements or low cost improvements that can actually get you there as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Of course.
All right, so let's talk about audits. So obviously, after you've got your benchmarking data in, the next step is going to be to diagnose where your biggest opportunities are. And that's going to come in the form of an ASHRAE level 2 audit, which is the mandate for this program. Everybody subject to Beps is going to need to get one of these done. When you get this report back, there's going to be a ton of data. There's going to be a lot of different recommendations that they can make. We're going to focus on what's relevant from a Beps perspective. So you certainly want, when you're, we can help coordinate this, but if you were to contract this on your own, you want to make sure that the auditor is going to be documenting all the existing building conditions, looking at the operating characteristics of the different systems in there, and then also the different types of spaces that may be used in that space. You want to break out everything by energy consumption by end use. You want to have a list of those different ECMs. You want to see how those different ECMs can impact your EUI or energy usage intensity. And you want to see a financial analysis of what that means for your budget. And then what really distinguishes a level 2 audit from a level 1 audit is that we'll create an interactive simulation of your energy systems. And it will allow you to test different hypotheses, different upgrades that you could potentially do, and how that could potentially impact your EUI. If you want to go a step further than that and do a level 3 audit, a level 3 audit actually entails sub-metering the different equipment. So you have an empirical documentation about how much each of those energy systems are using. So this is going to give you a higher level of specificity. However, a level 2 audit is going to give you a ton of data that the vast majority of people will be satisfied with. Some of these ECMs are going to be the low cost, no cost solutions that we recommend everybody look at, whether they're subject to Beps or not. One of our favorite, of course, is a solar power purchase agreement. This is an arrangement that for no cost, you can have a solar PV system put on your roof, and this will substantially lower your energy costs relative to what you'd be paying to Pepco. And importantly, from our perspective, it's going to lower your energy usage intensity by offsetting all the energy that you would be pulling from the grid that you're going to be generating yourself, and it's not going to be counting against you for an EUI score. So that's if you can do that, that's a really important improvement to make. Related to that, you can upgrade your lighting with LED, and we have some shared savings options for that. So if your budget's tight, you can finance that through the savings that you'll realize, and we have some different vehicles to do that with. Another simple thing to look at is your nighttime or non-operational load management, making sure you're not cooling your building to a very low temperature when nobody's using it, making sure if you have a maintenance crew in there coming in every day at 10 p.m. and turning all the lights on in the building, that's obviously not an efficient usage of your energy. You also, if you have an industrial setting, you can look at some more sophisticated things in terms of equipment sequencing. And then there's some cultural aspects, teaching the users of the building to have a culture of conservation and not being wasteful and being mindful of their impact on the building energy usage. And another simple thing is if you have a chiller, you could reset that chiller temperature at least every new season, at least 4 times a year, to make sure that that chiller temperature is matching the external temperature conditions and is meeting the needs of the building use. Moving on to the next level, these require a higher level of investment. The first is a variable speed drive. This pertains to any motor that you have in your HVAC system. So older systems would just throttle on, throttle off motors. There's a lot more energy use when you're turning on a motor and turning off a motor as compared to just adjusting the speed of that motor. And so these more sophisticated systems, especially when combined with these energy management information systems, can really lend to a lot of efficiency without a major upgrade. Another type of bigger upgrade would be a variable refrigerant flow HVAC system. And these systems replace compressor-based systems, which are much more energy intensive. And these are great if you have rooms in the buildings that need different temperatures. If some rooms need to be cool, some rooms need to be warm. These within the same unit can adjust for those temperature differentials in a very efficient manner. And what you really want to avoid, and what this helps you avoid, is simultaneously heating and cooling your building, which, as you can imagine, is very inefficient. You can also look at getting more efficient water fixtures, but importantly, for Beps perspective, it only cares about hot water. So these would be things like shower heads. So we really wouldn't care about, more efficient toilets because that water is not being heated. So that really wouldn't affect your energy usage intensity unless you have something, like a heated bidet, which I would recommend looking into if you're into the type of unique experience. And then boiler upgrades, obviously a major infrastructure improvement. Same with a chiller replacement. And then you can also look at implementing a combined heat and power system. These are really cool because they'll take the heat that's being generated from your boiler, the excess heat that's not actually, it's kind of running off the system or any other motor. It'll capture that heat, it'll turn it into electricity. So that will lower your electrical usage. And it will also get rid of all that excess heat, which is really important to do in the summer when you're trying to keep your building cool. We touched on EMIS. This is a field that's come a long way in the past few years and some really exciting technologies for some companies located right here in DC to give you some real-time measurement. And this is going to help a lot in goal tracking. And it's also a very cost-effective way to lower your EUI. And then Windows, Windows can be a pretty expensive replacement. So, we can help see what type of impact that would make using that energy model that's built in the ASHRAE Level 2 audit. And these are just some examples. Again, when you get back the audit report, you're going to have dozens of potential ECMs that you can look at. And it's also important to note that the impact of the ECM is really going to be unique upon your building situation at the time of that audit. So some of these low cost, no cost things that we touched on, unoccupied cooling, setback, making sure you're not keeping your building frigid when nobody's there. This can be as simple as adjusting a thermostat. It'll pay for itself within a month, but it could have a pretty sizable impact on your EUI, 1, 2, or 3 points. Chilled water reset, again, very low cost, but can have a significant impact. If you're looking at upgrading your boiler system, a hydronic heating system is really just a fancy term for a boiler system. That could be a $500,000 upgrade. It'll pay for itself in 4.5 years, and that will have a bigger bite into your EUI reduction. And then on the higher level, if you want to upgrade to one of those fancy VRF, the variable refrigerant flow HVAC systems, that's a multi-million-dollar investment. The payback can be pretty long on these if your existing system isn't that inefficient. But as you can see, in this particular case that we had looked at that site, that would have reduced their EUI by 74, which is certainly a sizable chunk as you're trying to get compliant. And we're going to move off this topic in a second. So do we have any questions about the ASHRAE Level 2 audit and what should be looking for there? Okay, so I'm going to move on to our last slide and I'll let Julian wrap it up for us. Julian, I don't know if you're on mute or not.
I am. Thanks again, AZ. So as we've mentioned throughout this presentation, Honeydew is here to help. We're learning more and more about the programs as they're coming through. We're definitely going to be working with the Energy Innovation Hub or Building Innovation Hub. And our process really starts by reviewing your benchmarking report, making sure that everything is accurate so that your baseline Energy Star or EUI score that is basically allowing you to understand if you fall below the median score or not, we need to make sure that's very accurate. So that's the first step. The second step is to schedule that ASHRAE Level 2 audit if you do in fact fall below the Energy Star score. After that, we're going to review the results of the report with you and then determine and report the pathway to DOEE before that February 1st deadline next year. From there, we're going to develop a 5-year action plan with the compliance cycle, coordinate with the service providers to implement energy conservation measures. We can also compare options for a few of these services. And then at the end, track your EUI progress against your 5-year plan goals to make sure that you're on a track to actually comply before the deadline, and also communications with DOE Beps program to make sure that we're doing everything as accurate as possible, just like with the benchmarking services. But with that said, we've completed the webinar.